All right, now let's get started. Our first guest is Senator Mike Gabbard. He has represented the Hawaii State Senate District 20 since 2006, which includes Kapolei, Makakilo, and portions of Kalailoa, Waipahu, and Ewa. He is currently in his sixth year as chair of the Senate Agriculture and Environment Committee. Prior to that, he was chair of the Senate Energy and Environment Committee during 2009 to 2015 and chair of the Water, Land, and Agriculture Committee in 2016. During this time, he authored 54 bills that became law relating to energy efficiency, renewable energy, endangered species protection, industrial hemp, the environment, public safety, and many more. Prior to serving in the Senate, he served as council member for the Honolulu City Council. However, these days, he's more commonly known as Tulsi's dad, not as Senator Gabbard. So at this time, let's have a warm welcome for Senator Gabbard. Welcome.
Hello, Mike Ako, and thank you, Melody. As chair of the Senate AEN committee and the primary introducer of the Green Amendment bill, mahalo for inviting me to say a few words about one of my priority bills. But also first, mahalo nui loa to all the individuals and organizations that are working hard to preserve and protect our environment. I'm sincerely grateful for all you do. So today's topic, the Green Amendment, our constitutional right to clean air, water, and healthy climate. Wow, that sounds like a tall order. Green amendments are often called environmental rights amendments. So I've read that support is gaining momentum in 13 states across the country so far, but only 3 states have actually passed a Green Amendment bill. It was Pennsylvania and Montana, I believe, in 1971. And then New York, just this past November, became the 3rd state. So I'm hopeful that Hawaii will become number 4. So you've asked me to talk about why green amendments are important. As the nation's only island state, personally, I think it's a no-brainer that our beautiful Hawaii is extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change. The ongoing threats posed by increasingly intense storms, ocean warming, sea level rise. I could go on and on. But the real question is, what are we doing about it? The threats to our environment is one of the reasons I decided to introduce Hawaii's Green Amendment bill. But equally important is a desire to ensure the rights of all people are protected when it comes to having a safe and healthy environment. So green amendments, they liken the rights of religious expression and free speech to those of clean air and water, providing a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. They help achieve environmental justice by placing emphasis on these rights as being part of our basic civil liberties. But more importantly, they put environmental rights on an equal footing with other basic political rights. Now, some folks are saying that environmental rights, they don't belong in the Constitution's Bill of Rights. But I believe that's because they don't understand how this helps to ensure equitable treatment to all, regardless of race, religion, or economic status. So by educating folks now, like we're doing here today, people can feel empowered to take action. I first learned about the importance of this legislation when Maya Van Rossum reached out to me about introducing Senate Bill 502 for the 2021 session. And while the bill did not cross the finish line, at least it got the conversation started. So I've reintroduced the bill this session as Senate Bill 2962, and it amends Article 1 of our state constitution to recognize and protect the inherent and inalienable right of all individuals to clean water and air, secure climate, and health ecosystems. So if we can get 2/3 of the House and the Senate to vote in favor of it this session, it'll be on the ballot this coming November, and the people will have the opportunity to approve it with just a simple majority. So I commend you all for being here today. Mahalo nui again to the organizers, and of course, Maya, we wouldn't be here without you. We can't do this alone. The Hawaiian word is laulima. It takes laulima, many hands working together to get the job done. And above all else, it takes aloha. So don't forget to go to the Capitol website, capitol.hawaii.gov, and submit your testimony in support of SB 2962, which I'll be hearing in my AEN committee this next Wednesday, February 2nd at 1 p.m. And please spread the word to your family, friends, and strangers to send in their testimony. It really makes a difference. I've got another meeting I am sorry I have to attend that I'm late for, but my community liaison, Meg Turner, she'll be with you for the remainder of the conference. And so please don't hesitate to reach out to me if I can help you in any way. Aloha and mahalo.
Aloha, Senator. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, then at this time, let's go straight into our featured speaker is Maya Van Rossen. She is a Delaware River keeper, environmental attorney, founder of the National Green Amendment Movement, and author of the Green Amendment, Securing Our Right to a Healthy Environment. At this time, let's all welcome Maya Van Rossen.
Thank you, Melody, for that very kind introduction. And I'm sorry that Senator Gabbard isn't here because I don't think of him as Tulsi's dad. I think of him as our Green Amendment champion in the state of Hawaii. He's an amazing, powerful person, and I'm so honored to work with him and have him say such kind words. And of course, there are others who are part of today that have been really powerful partners in advancing this Green Amendment movement. Dave and Sherry, Melody, Ted Bowlen, and there are others. And I'm so grateful for the partnership and for the opportunity to join with you as a partner, as part of the coalition to try to seek and secure a constitutional Green Amendment in the state of Hawaii. So I've already been introduced as to who I am and that I have all these different hats. I think the most important thing I want you to know about me is that I have been an environmental attorney and activist for nearly 30 years now, fighting the good fight for our beautiful earth and all of our people. I keep looking, seeing that 27 years. I got to fix that. I got to update that number. It's so old now. It's getting older every year. But I'm not. The thing is, it's through that activism, through that work that I really have come to experience firsthand, as unfortunately probably so many of you have, how our current system of environmental protection laws here in the United States of America, I don't care what state you're in, is fundamentally failing us. And that we really do need a new pathway for environmental protection in our states and at the federal level. And when I say to people, we need a new pathway for environmental protection, whether I'm talking to lawyers, activists, or just everyday people or legislators, inevitably I get the same kind of reaction. How is it possible, Maya? How is it possible that you're saying that we need something more when it comes to environmental protection in our states? After all, you can look at Hawaii, you can look at any state, you can look at the federal level. We have literally thousands and thousands and thousands of laws and regulations, agencies, policies, and programs, all of which are supposed to be focused on environmental protection. But the other thing that we can see is that when we look across Hawaii, when we look across our nation, we have really serious environmental problems. Whether you're talking about the drinking water contamination at Red Hill, whether you're talking about pesticide contamination, whether you're talking about the climate crisis or the proliferation of PFAS contamination into our water, into our fish, into our ecosystems, we can see that we still, and when we think about environmental justice, and we can see how communities of color and indigenous communities continue to be disproportionately impacted by pollution and degradation, just by looking at what's happening on the ground. We can see that there is a fundamental failure when it comes to environmental protection. We can see that something powerful and important is missing. And I would suggest to you that that powerful something, in very significant part, is that we do not recognize and protect the rights of all people to things like clean water, clean air, stable climates, and healthy environments. We do not recognize them as being fundamental rights deserving of the same highest constitutional recognition and protection that we give to other fundamental rights we hold dear. Things like the right to free speech, freedom of religion, the right to peaceably assemble, and other fundamental rights, right? There, each one of us has a different one of these rights that strikes our heart, but it's when they strike our heart, it strikes our heart deeply, because these are rights that are so ingrained in who we are as people from America that we wanted them lifted up, recognized, and protected in the Bill of Rights section of our Constitution, where we, the people, have said to our government officials, these are our inalienable rights that we want to have highest protection. And so the problem is, though, right, when it comes to clean water and clean air and healthy environments, these basic essentials of life for all of us, we do not find them in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, except with very limited exception. There actually are a few places where we do have this highest constitutional recognition and protection. And one of them is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I'm going to tell you about Pennsylvania's story when it comes to their Green Amendment, because I think it is both instructional as well as inspirational. So Pennsylvania's Article 1, Section 27 of the Constitution, it is in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, recognizes and protects the rights of all people, including future generations, to clean air and pure water and healthy environments, and recognizes the trustee duties of the state to protect the natural resources for the benefit of all the people. This amendment was actually added to the Pennsylvania Constitution in 1971, right? That's 50 years ago. And so you would have thought that environmental protection in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania would have been so much better than everywhere else in the nation. But that's not to be the case. Pennsylvania's environment over the last 50 years has been allowed to be attacked and degraded in very serious and significant ways, not the least of which is by the fossil fuel industry. And that has happened despite the fact that it has this constitutional language in its Bill of Rights. So you might say to me then, well, why, Maya? Why do you say that this kind of language, this kind of protection is so powerful, is so important? If Pennsylvania had it, and yet the fossil fuel industry has been able to inflict very significant harm on the environment and on the communities, amongst other things. Well, the thing is while Pennsylvania does have this language very early on, pretty much I think the year after it got added to Pennsylvania's Constitution, and by the way, it got added to the Constitution by the Pennsylvania legislature voting unanimously through 2 consecutive legislative sessions to have it added to the Constitution. And then it was supported by a vote of 4-1 by the people of Pennsylvania to be added. But so, you know, real great enthusiasm for it. But almost as soon as it was added to the Constitution, there was a real overreach in how some people sought to use it. And there were some really bad cases that were brought. Amongst them was a case called the National Gettysburg Battlefield Tower case. And the long story short, this was a case where they used that Environmental Rights Amendment to try to defeat the construction of an educational viewing tower on a neighboring property that would look out over the Gettysburg battlefield. That was one of the first uses of the Pennsylvania Green Amendment. And so you can imagine if you were a justice, and perhaps a justice without full appreciation for the values of having a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment, you can imagine saying, wow, if this is how people are going to use it, right, we're going to put the brakes on that right away. And that's exactly what they did. And in this early decision, they declared the Green Amendment to be really just a statement of policy. And in the language that was used to address this case and address how the Green Amendment, the Pennsylvania Environmental Rights Amendment, should be utilized and addressed, the way the majority decision was handed down with regards to the Environmental Rights Amendment, the Chief Justice at the time described that decision as emasculating, disemboweling Pennsylvania's newly minted constitutional environmental right. And again, declaring it to be just a statement of policy, pretty language in the Constitution that didn't really change anything when it comes to environmental protection. As I tell people, you know, when you're a lawyer, if you have something that's a statement of policy, That's really just good advice. And you can take it or you can leave it. And in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the legislators left it. And so we did not see a change in how the environment was protected because of this policy statement for 42 years, right? For 42 years, we had this great language on the books, just treated like good advice that could be ignored, and it was ignored. And so nothing changed for the people of Pennsylvania. But it was during this 42 years that the shale gas extraction industry came to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, bringing with it all of its highly polluting industrial operations where it sought to drill down into the earth and shatter the shale in order to release every little last droplet of natural gas that they could find in the geology of the earth. And in bringing this highly polluting, devastating industrial operation to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, they brought tremendous deforestation and land transformation and devastation of the natural resources of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They brought pollution of the water of Pennsylvanians. Surface water, groundwater, drinking water supplies were contaminated by the fracking industry. They brought with it tremendous air pollution, including climate changing methane emissions. And they brought with it the proliferation of pipelines and compressor stations and liquefied natural gas export facilities, all of which brought their own devastation and highly polluting consequences for Pennsylvania communities and Pennsylvania environments. Right. And so for 42 years, well, not for 42 years, when this industry came, we had this really sort of dead letter in the books. And so this industry was allowed to wreak havoc on Pennsylvania's communities and environments. And really, given the state of the law in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the fracking industry was able to overwhelm Pennsylvania's environments and communities. For the leaders from the fracking industry went behind closed doors and wrote for themselves a piece of legislation that in 2012 was passed by the Pennsylvania legislature and came to be known as Act 13. Act 13 was literally a gift basket to the fracking industry. And of course it was, because they wrote it for themselves, right? And Act 13 did a lot of bad things. Amongst the things that it did was it mandated that drilling and fracking be allowed to happen in every part of every community in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, including mandating that operating drilling and fracking, highly industrial drilling and fracking well pads be allowed to be located as close as 300 feet from people's homes, from hospitals, from playgrounds, from schools. It put in place automatic waivers from even minimal environmental protection standards that applied to all other industries. It relieved the industry of the obligation to notify those who are on private drinking water wells that their drinking water had potentially become contaminated by these industrial fracking operations, right? So the truth is, and it did so much more, and the truth is, as bad as things were for the people of Pennsylvania when it came to fracking, things were about to get a whole lot worse if Act 13 was allowed to go into force and effect. Now, we at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network had been, and I as the Delaware Riverkeeper had been fighting fracking for many, many years, with actually some pretty good success for the benefit of my river. That's another story. But for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, again, fracking was wreaking havoc. Well, when this law passed, we were thinking we have to find a way to take on this law, right? Because of the devastating consequences for our environment, for our communities, for future generations. But if you have a law that's been passed by your legislature and signed by your governor, you don't have that many options. You can protest and let them know you're angry, but that may not change anything. You could try to get your legislators to repeal the law or amend the law. That wasn't going to happen in Pennsylvania. You can sit down and shut up and move on to the next issue. Well, we were going to do that. Or you can go to the ballot box and try to elect better people into office so that maybe in a couple of years you can turn things around. But by then it's too late. The law has gone into effect and more damage has been inflicted. So as we were thinking about what were we going to do, we remembered that we had in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution, this long ignored constitutional environmental rights amendment. And we believed that this law was such an incredible overreach and that we were in a moment in time when we might be able to overturn that 42 years of bad precedent. And so we challenged the law, claiming that it would violate the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania if it was allowed to go into effect. Certain critical provisions would violate the Constitution. And there were actually 7 towns, municipalities, who wanted to join us in that litigation for their own reasons. And they had their own legal arguments, but they joined us in this environmental rights argument. Now, at the time, there was a very conservative Pennsylvania Supreme Court in place, led by a very conservative Chief Justice, known as Chief Justice Ronald Castile. But despite that, in December of 2013, we got an amazing victory out of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court with the plurality opinion actually written by that conservative Chief Justice. And I want you to read with me a few of the things Chief Justice Castile wrote in the opinion we secured in December of 2013. He wrote that by any responsible account, the exploitation of the Marcellus Shale Formation, those industrial fracking operations, will produce a detrimental effect on the environment, on the people, their children, and future generations. That the natural resources that were being harmed were resources essential to life, to health, and to liberty, and that as a result, the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging were in fact unconstitutional because they would violate the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And in that moment, with that victory, we defeated some of the most devastating aspects of Act 13, preventing them from ever going into effect. But at the same time, we breathed legal life into that long ignored constitutional environmental rights amendment and literally restored to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and healthy environments. It was really amazing, really powerful. Now, since that December victory, we, of course, have been doing the work in Pennsylvania of using that victory to better address environmental issues across the Commonwealth, in the fracking context, but also out of the fracking context. And we've been having a lot of amazing success. But while we were going forth doing this work, I was thinking more and more about the power of what we had accomplished. And I really had what I now call my Green Amendment epiphany. I recognized that there was actually a message for all communities, all people in all states across our nation. The message that our rights to a clean and healthy environment are to a clean and healthy environment. And the best way that we could do that was to rise up together in what I call a Green Amendment movement, a movement to put in place constitutional environmental rights amendments like what Pennsylvania has, raising up environmental rights, raising up environmental protection to that highest constitutional level. Now, the thing is, if you want to accomplish this, not just any language will do. Actually, most states across our nation talk about the environment in their constitutions, but there are only 2 states, Pennsylvania and Montana, or 3 states, Pennsylvania and Montana and New York as of last November, that fulfill the elements of what I have defined to be a Green Amendment, meaning that we are raising up environmental rights to this highest standing and protection. So what are those amongst those critical elements to accomplish that? Well, the language has to be in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. That is where we place those other fundamental rights. That placement secures critical legal protections that you don't get otherwise. And so if we want environmental rights to be on par with those other fundamental rights, we've got to put it in the same part of the Constitution where we place those other fundamental rights. We need to be clear that we are talking about the life-sustaining elements of the environment, things like water, air, climate, flora, fauna, ecosystems, soils, right? Not things like fishing, hunting, and trapping, which may have their place and may be very valid and valuable to many people for many reasons, but it's not the same as the right to access clean water and clean air. Unless you are an indigenous population that is really dependent, right, upon fishing as your food source. And that is a whole other important conversation. It's really valuable to be protecting other essential qualities of the environment, like the natural qualities of the environment, the cultural qualities of the environment, the human health protections that come from a clean and healthy environment, the scenic beauty of the environment that enriches our lives and our communities in so many ways. We need to be clear that we're talking about the rights of all people, including future generations. And we need to be clear that we are talking about all government officials, that this is not just the job of our state legislators, that all government officials at every level of government are duty bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people of the state at every time they are engaged in decision making. And the law has to be what we call self-executing, meaning that it has legal standing and meaning and enforceability in its own right. That if the law isn't protecting your right to clean water, you can turn to the Constitution to get that protection. Just like we did with Act 13. Act 13 was going to sacrifice our water, our air, right, our people. So we were able to turn to our constitutional right to pure water and clean air to say that that law cannot stand under the constitutional framework that the people of Pennsylvania had put in place. Now, Hawaii is amongst the states that already has meaningful language in its constitution, right? And in fact, in Hawaii, we already have language that talks about the state as a trustee of the natural resources of the state for the benefit of all the people. And that language has served Hawaiians quite well when it comes to natural resources protection and holding their government officials accountable to protect natural resources in important ways. And so when we talk about Hawaii's Green Amendment, we're not talking about the trustee language that we see in Pennsylvania's Green Amendment and elsewhere, and in other amendments that are advancing in other states. But Hawaii's language talking about the right to a clean and healthy environment, well, that is a different story. That language is not in the Bill of Rights section, where we have other fundamental rights, like the right to free speech and freedom of religion. So already it has different, legal standing. If you're in a situation where somebody's claiming they have private property rights and therefore should be entitled to do what they want on their property, despite its ramifications for their neighbors and for their environment, there's no counterbalance, because the environment isn't in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. It's down here in Article 11 when it comes to environmental rights. But if we bring it up into the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, property rights would have to be balanced with environmental rights. Article 11, Section 9 also is very clear that your rights to a clean and healthy environment are defined by the laws passed by the legislators. So if your legislators don't pass laws that properly protect the environment, if there's a gap in the law, such as is the case with PFAS contamination, that man-made family of chemicals that's been allowed to proliferate our environment because of a lack of protection for a lack of laws and regulations for so many years, right? If you have laws that, when applied as written, result in environmental racism and the disproportionate impacting of communities, well, your constitutional right has been fulfilled, because the responsibility was left to your legislators to legislate and to define what that right is. But you, the people, don't have the power to be able to really meaningfully challenge that in the same way you would if you had Bill of Rights protection and recognition. And then again, when it talks about enforcement, again, that enforcement is limited by regulations and laws. And so if they don't give you the right to go to court, you don't have the right to go to court. But if you have a constitutional violation of a fundamental right, you do get access to the courts. It's not limited by what a law defines, because you have that constitutional right, and the government is not entitled to infringe upon your constitutional right to clean water and clean air. So this is what you have, but we're talking about something different than this. What we're talking about is this. adding to Article 1 of the Hawaii Constitution, the language that says that all people have an inherent and inalienable right to clean water and air and healthy ecosystems, including climate, flora, fauna, and soil, and to the preservation of the natural, cultural, scenic, and healthful qualities of the environment. That makes clear that these rights belong to both present and future generations, right? And that the state and its subdivisions, meaning all levels of government, are duty bound to protect these rights, to not infringe upon them when they are governing and undertaking their government activities. So it's different. Now, at this point, in addition to the 3 states that already have constitutional green amendments, we have green amendment proposals actually advancing in 12 others. And Hawaii is very much at the front of the pack. And I am super excited at the possibility and the opportunity. And I would like to say the likelihood that Hawaii will be number 4 to have a constitutional green amendment and really be not just recognized as the national leader in this movement, but as Senator Gabbard said, take its place as the 4th state to have a constitutional green amendment. And we have so many wonderful partners that are already coming on board in support of this amendment, so many wonderful organizations. And if you belong to an organization that's not on this screen, but you want to join our Green Amendment movement, be recognized on the website and join the effort, you know, we would love to have you. And so all you have to do is go to the website, sign up, send me an email, reach out to Sherry, Dave, or Ted, and let them know, and we'll loop you in. Now, before we go on to Ted and some others and some questions and answer, I just want to sort of talk broad strokes about what would it mean? What would it mean to have this Green Amendment language added to the Constitution? Again, broad strokes, right? Well, it would mean that environmental rights were given that highest constitutional standing and protection. Like I said, if property rights were implicated, the environment would be there to balance it. People wouldn't be allowed to claim property rights as a way to inflict devastating environmental rights harm on their friends and their neighbors. There would have to be a balancing. We all know how powerfully things like the right to free speech and freedom of religion, even gun rights, are protected, whether it's through advocacy or laws or in the courts, because they are recognized in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions. Well, that same highest power now comes to bear for the environment. It would mean necessarily that government would have to focus on preventing pollution and degradation and harm to the environment, not just accepting it as a foregone conclusion and kind of hopping to the end of the process when we're focused on permitting. What permit are we going to issue to manage and legalize the who, the when, the where of the degradation that our laws say can happen? Now, because government cannot infringe on your constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment, in order to prevent that constitutional infringement, they need to be thinking about it at every step of the governing process from day one. And so that's just a transformational change in how the law works. It's no longer that you turn to the legislation that says this industry is entitled to discharge this amount of pollution as long as they have XYZ permit. No. Now the people have a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment, and government officials have to think from day one, how am I going to honor and protect that? There is a new layer of protection. So it is not enough for government to say, well, when we allow that highly polluting industrial operation to overtake that part of the environment or that community, it's okay because they complied with the statutes and regulations on the books. They now have to be able to demonstrate that when they were reviewing that operation, putting in place, issuing that permit, putting in place that law, they now have to be very, very clear that they did consider meaningfully the constitutional rights of the people to a clean and healthy environment. Environmental justice is incredibly strengthened because now all people, regardless of their race and their ethnicity and their socioeconomics, all people have the same constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. And all government officials are constitutionally bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people equitably. You cannot have environmental sacrifice zones being created and perpetuated when you have a constitutional green amendment. It's constitutionally prohibited. There is generational protection because now government officials, when they're thinking about environmental rights, do have to not just think about, but actually protect the environmental rights of future generations. And we have made clear through court decision-making in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that this isn't just pretty language. This isn't just a pretty idea, that actually government officials have to demonstrate that, that their governing actions will in fact protect the environmental rights of future generations. It's not that we get to use up everything here today and future generations get what's left over. It doesn't work that way. With a Green Amendment, we're strengthening the existing laws on the books because they now have to be interpreted and applied through this lens of environmental rights. How can we use those laws to ensure that we are protecting the environmental rights of all the people? But it also becomes a powerful foundation for government officials who want to do better, right? Want to do better, whether it's legislation, regulation, permitting, whatever decision making. They can now ground that better effort to protect the environment in this constitutional obligation. And if there's a gap in the law, I talked earlier about PFAS, right? That's that man-made family of chemicals in Teflon, in stain-resistant carpeting, in food wrappers, that for literally years and years and years, that's used in firefighting foam by the Defense Department. That substance was unregulated for so long. That's why it is in so many parts of our environment, in our fish, in our bodies, harming people so devastatingly. Well, that was allowed to happen because of a gap in the law, and nobody had anything to grab onto. But if you had that kind of situation today, or if there had been a Green Amendment at the time that PFAS was advancing, and we had this science showing that it was harmful, that people could have turned to their right to clean water and a healthful environment to ensure that their government officials took meaningful action to prevent the proliferation and the use of that chemical in a way that would get into our environment and into our bodies, having such devastating consequences. The Green Amendment is not just about things that are going to happen in the future. You can't lock in, right, environmental or constitutional violations. And also, if you can show, like we did with Act 13, that a government action was going to inflict devastating harm, then you can work to prevent that harm. As the Montana Supreme Court said, you don't have to wait for the dead fish to float on the surface of our state's rivers and streams before you can use the Constitution to prevent the harm. This is not going to result in lawsuits of neighbor against neighbor or people suing business operations. This is about holding the government accountable to do what's right by the environment and environmental protection. That is who we are focused on. The goal of a Green Amendment is to get better decisions out of our government officials in the first place. These are little Loraxes going to Pennsylvania Governor Wolf demanding their environmental rights. But the reality of a Green Amendment is when our government officials get it wrong, people do get access to the courts to try to vindicate their constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment and get the protections that they are constitutionally entitled to. So with that, I hope I've taken you with me on a little bit of a journey to recognize not only that we have a right to a clean and healthy environment, but that the best way we can and should ensure that right gets meaningful recognition and protection by our government officials is to pass a constitutional Green Amendment, add it to Hawaii's Bill of Rights, and to make sure that we are protecting both present and future generations. If you want to learn more, and you're going to hear more today, but we do have a website, HI for Hawaii, greenamendments.org. We've got resources up there, information up there about the movement as a whole, but about what's specifically happening in Hawaii. And more information will be put up there as the Green Amendment advances in the state. So I really thank you for joining us. I hope that you found this as of interest, and I hope that we can partner up and make it happen for Hawaii.
Wow, Maya, that is fantastic. I love your energy. I love your enthusiasm, and we really learned a lot from that short discussion. So thank you. Thank you so much. Next, we
Okay.
have Ted Bowlen. He is an environmental advocate who focuses primarily on climate emergency and harms to coral reefs. Ted previously served as the Deputy Attorney General for 15 years, representing Hawaii on water pollution and drinking water issues. He will be discussing how we can support legislation for a green amendment and to move it forward. Ted, take it away.
Thank you, Melody. And thank you, Maya. It has been a privilege to be involved with Maya on this wonderful effort, and with Senator Gabbard and all the others who have been working on this. It's truly an opportunity for Hawaii to move into leadership on the environment by stepping up and moving its environmental rights that exist in the Constitution up to the Bill of Rights and stating them broadly there for future action. I think it'll make a fundamental change in the way the environment is perceived by legislators, by courts, by citizens. And so I really think this is a great step forward if we do it. The first thing I want to do is talk about next steps. For those who have heard what Maya has to say and inspired by it, and Senator Gabbard too, who introduced the bill, we have an opportunity to testify and to indicate support for the Green Constitutional Amendment. This Wednesday, as Senator Gabbard said, he's holding a hearing with the Agriculture and Environment Committee of the Senate at 1 p.m. That's on Wednesday, the 2nd, I think it is, of February. And you can testify up until 24 hours ahead, which is Tuesday by 1 o'clock. You can testify in writing. And if you do that at the same time, you can also sign up to testify orally. And I would urge you to do both, because it's also important, in addition to seeing the stuff in writing that you submit. If you express in person your desires, that also has an impact on legislators. I think the best testimony to legislators is testimony that explains why you particularly care about this change in the law. It's nice to talk about the theory of the law. It's nice to talk about the Constitution. We lawyers can go on forever about that. But it's really important to say, this matters to me. And I think Maya's slides showed some of the reasons that we look at. You know, we've got all these environmental problems, chiefly Red Hill right now, and a bunch of other things that, you know, the environment's not being protected enough. And raising this constitutional amendment will help to do that. So please get in and testify. Think about your own life and how it affects you, and how having the ability to force your government to protect the environment fully for clean air, water, healthy ecosystems, including as it respects to climate and other things, and the cultural aspects, cultural qualities of the environment. These are all great things for the state of Hawaii. In addition to the environmental aspects of this, people have touched upon the environmental rights, the environmental justice aspects of this, and particularly as it affects the Native Hawaiian community, because we do have protection also in the Constitution for traditional and customary gathering rights in, I think it's Article 12, Section 7 of the Hawaii Constitution. This is an opportunity to state it more broadly, to of a right to preserve the cultural qualities of the environment. The meaning of that can be defined by courts and by legislatures in the future, but having those basic rights enshrined in our Constitution is a great step forward. The other things you can do that, in addition to testifying on the bill, is to contact your representatives. There's a bill in the House as well, the identical bill, House Bill 1803, that I hope will come up for a hearing soon. So both your representatives and your senators, it helps to have you express your interest in those different bills, and ask them to hear the bills and pass the bill so that we can move on to the amendment stage. Share it with your friends and your family. Spread the word. This is a movement at this point. It's not just a couple of bills. In order to get this through in Hawaii, we need to generate movement type action. And so spread the word, pass it to your friends and family. 350.org is, which I'm also associated with Dave Mullenix and Sherry Pollack, who are on today, is making this a high priority for 350.org because it affects the environment so intensely, and particularly the climate. So please look out for an email I think we'll get from 350.org. I hope we have all of your emails so that we can contact you. I hope you will get involved and stay involved in this. There are other aspects besides Red Hill. I mentioned that one, but we've had, for example, in Kauai, the people of Kauai, we had a serious action necessary under statute and permit against the Agribusiness Development Corporation, which was allowing pesticides and sediments to be discharged to the ocean. And a green amendment like this would provide an additional basis for action under that so that you wouldn't have to rely on statute. And in a lot of areas, in the same way, you would have a stronger action. I say that as a lawyer, that you bring an action maybe under the statute, maybe you sue an agency for a poor permit, but if you also have a fundamental statement that environment is a fundamental right in Hawaii, that's another basis on which you can sue and a basis for courts to look at more seriously. So I don't want to go on for long. We've got the website in the chat for thegenerations.org. Please, please get involved, stay involved, and carry on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ted. Thank you for that. Okay, our next guest is Lauren Blickley. Okay, she is the Hawaii Regional Manager of the Surfrider Foundation. She is based on Maui and has worked within Hawaii's environmental advocacy community for over a decade. As Surfriders Hawaii's regional manager, her work focuses on supporting the state's 4 volunteer-based Surfrider chapters on Kauai, Oahu, Maui, and Hawaii Island to protect our island's oceans, waves, and beaches. She is also the co-founder of Zero Waste Maui Coalition. This time, let's all welcome Lauren Blickley.
Thanks so much, Melody. And I am just here to say a few quick words. And I first want to just thank Maya for not only the significant amount of work that she has put into this effort, but also identifying the opportunity for a green amendment here in Hawaii. When Maya first approached Surfrider last year about supporting this legislation, it honestly was just a no-brainer. You know, this is exactly what we are fighting for every single day as environmental nonprofits, a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, you know, not only for the environment's sake, but also for the sake of our community. And any way that we can protect and strengthen this right, we must support. It is also my hope that the inclusion of a green amendment maybe, you know, just maybe, will make our work as environmental advocates a little bit easier. I'm definitely not naive enough to think that it's going to solve all of our environmental challenges and issues here in Hawaii, but it will certainly give and add a level of protection and strengthen our community's ability to push back against these projects or actions that Ted has mentioned and that Maya has brought up that are just not in line with the clean water, the clean air, and the healthy ecosystems that we really do need to be able to sustain our society. And so on that note, I strongly urge you and your organizations to join this movement, support the Green Constitutional Amendment for Hawaii, sign on, and urge your constituents and your networks to support this really important bill. Mahalo.
All right, mahalo, Lauren. Thank you very much for all your work as well. Okay, at this time, I'd like to call our next guest, who is 17-year-old Tyler Levine. She serves on the Hawaii Youth Climate Coalition, which is a youth-led community advocacy organization dedicated to fighting for climate justice by planting seeds for systematic change within the soil of our society. Tyler.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I just wanted to start off with a huge, wave of gratitude to Ted, to Maya. I think this is an incredible movement, and I hope that we can continue to perpetuate its living legacy. With escalating variability in climatic patterns, trade architecture, global pandemics, social relations, and more, the dramatic disarray we are experiencing poses a threat to every dimension of life. Thus, we as youth are being placed in a world that is quite literally falling apart with no means to correct the predicament because the interests of fossil fuel industries and business as usual is obviously not weighed against people who do not have the right to vote. So to rewrite the history of our future, it is imperative that we establish a Green Amendment in the state of Hawaii to replant our Constitution in the foundation from which the elements that support all life grow. With the state's endorsement in the inalienable rights of all people to pure water, clean air, and a stable climate, of course, and healthy environments, the rights of all people, regardless of the discriminatory lines that humanity has drawn between people within the moral confinement of our social community, will not be denied. So thank you so much for continuing to share this movement and continuing to grow this movement. And we're so excited, so thankful, so passionate to be a part of it. Please plant seeds to grow this incredible shift in consciousness, shift in mindset, and redefinement of our Constitution, and really of the foundation of our civilization today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tyler. Thank you. Okay, I did note that we have Council Member Kelly King amongst us. I'm just wondering if she might want to say a few words in support of the Green Amendment. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Maya. I really wasn't prepared to talk because I'm running around doing chores in between listening to this, but what a fantastic presentation by Tyler. You know, that when I was at COP26, which is this billboard behind me was one of the ones around town, around Scotland, my favorite one. And it says, if you can't read it, it says slowly phase out fossil fuels, or no, quickly phase out fossil fuels, or slowly phase out the grandkids. So, and as a grandmother, that really hit home. But I do want to say that I love this presentation. I really am appreciative of this Green Amendment for the folks who came up with this, because one of my biggest concerns about carbon credits is the fact that, you know, we're allowing folks to pollute in one area if they do the right thing in another area. And you said it perfectly, Maya. That's the one issue I have with the idea of carbon credits. So I'm following this closely, and I will be following at the state legislature. So happy to support it. And thank you all for everything that everybody here is doing.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that. So at this time, let's go ahead with some questions and answer period. Now, there were a few questions in the chat, so I'll start with those. And they were from Alan Burdick. Okay, first question. Would the Green Amendment also involve repeal of Article 11, Section 9? If not, what would be the remaining force of that current section?
So it is something that was specifically discussed and considered. And I think that the thought at the time was that there was an appreciation for Article 11, Section 9, and that, that Hawaii would be better served by maintaining it. As Alan notes, that the Article 11, Section 9 provides a private right of action, which, given the language, would be a private, and some case law, the way the courts have interpreted, is it's a private right of action that allows the people of the state to enforce the laws that are on the books against whoever may be in violation of it. So I think that that is a potential ongoing value and benefit of Article 11, Section 9. I think because the Green Amendment is coming second, and because of the way Senator Gabbard and Representative Peruso on the House side and other legislators are speaking about it, and hopefully all you will be speaking about it when you give your public comment, you'll be making clear that we are seeking something more than, stronger than, higher than Article 11, Section 9. And that should be what is used to inform the interpretation of the new Green Amendment, and so that the Green Amendment is being interpreted as separate and apart from and stronger than Article 11, Section 9, as opposed to Article 11, Section 9 being the lens through the Green Amendment should be interpreted. It should sort of be flipped around. But there is the reality. We're going to have to work to make sure that we get that appropriate interpretation. I don't know, Ted, if you have anything to offer to that, but those are my thoughts.
I think you covered it. Nothing to add.
Okay, so the next question then. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Maya. This one is also from Alan, and you may have already put that in the text, but can you provide text of Pennsylvania's Green Amendment and a link to the good Supreme Court decision that you cited?
Yeah, so I put the language in the chat. Also, if you go to the resources page of higreenamendment.org, on that page lower down, you'll actually see I've done a write-up of a number of the really powerful cases that have come forth out of Pennsylvania and Montana. We don't have any out in New York yet because it just passed in November. But there are some summaries of those cases as well as citations, so you can find those cases yourself. And some of the key cases, like that Pennsylvania case, actually is on the website as well. Also on the website are some talking points and some frequently asked questions and some comments from last year that were submitted by our partner coalition of organizations as well as myself to also give you some additional information on Hawaii's proposal. But there's a lot there. And if you can't find it, you can always, I put my email in the chat. I'm pretty accessible and I'll help make sure that you get it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Maya. Okay, next we have a question from Bill South. Is the Green Amendment in danger in Montana? He's currently in Montana, but he's local here, with the right-wing Republican legislature now in control. At least one of the senators, John Tester, is supporting most tenets of environmental rights.
So, Bill, what a great question, because it allows me to make a great point. You know, one of the incredible values about the Green Amendment, one of the reasons why we really consider it a legacy piece of governance, and so too does Senator Gabbard, he's talked about it that way, is the fact that it is a constitutional amendment. And so it is harder to get a constitutional amendment added to your, or to amend your constitution, right, to get language added, but that means it's also harder to get it removed. And the reality is, once people have recognized rights, whatever they are, they're generally very loath to give it up. And so, you know, Montana's Environmental Rights Amendment, its Green Amendment, has been around for a little while as well. I don't think people are going to be looking to give it up. It has served the state in some really helpful ways. It actually was passed around the time of Pennsylvania's, but wasn't really used until about 2000. And then it was used in some really helpful ways, and then it sort of went quiet. And now it's started to be used again as recently as 2019 and 2020. I like to think inspired by my Green Amendment movement. Maybe they said, hey, we have one of those, we should start using it. But I'm not sure. But anyway, it has come back up into the forefront of what's happening in Montana. So I think given the higher effort to get it removed because it's already in the Constitution, I think it's unlikely that you're going to have the amendment removed in Montana, or frankly, anywhere. Again, it's one of the powerful benefits. It's harder to get it, but once you have it, you're unlikely to lose it.
Great, thank you. Now, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Perhaps if you would like to ask a question, you can go ahead and raise your hand. And I see Alan Burdick has raised his hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maya. This has been very helpful. I wanted to ask a question based on the Montana situation. You have what is currently an extremely right-wing legislature over there. Do you sense in your other work around the country that people who are other than left-wing Democrats are supportive of this kind of amendment?
Yeah, I mean, it's really rather exciting and interesting and fascinating to see how it plays out in different states. Every state's different. So, you know, I approach my Green Amendment movement work and my partnership differently in every state. It depends on the partners. It depends on the state. So the language in every single state is different because it has to suit the personalities of that state. I come in and say, you know, here are the minimums, here's some suggested ideas, here's some suggested language, but then we work together with our champions and our grassroots partners to figure out what's better, how the movement, or, you know, what's right for the state, how the movement grows, and the partners and my role in the partnership is different in every single state. And so too is the way the amendment is passed, is advancing in terms of partisanship. So in some states, like in New Mexico, it really sadly is coming down in terms of legislative votes along party lines. But what we see in the people is, you know, everybody recognizes they need and want clean water and clean air. And so we get some really interesting people, farmers and others who traditionally are considered more conservative, coming forward and recognizing that this helps them and speaking for it. And then we have other states where it's not just in the grassroots where we're seeing all partisan support, but we're actually seeing it in the legislature. In the state of New Jersey, in the state of Maine, the leadership is bipartisan from the get-go. And in fact, in Maine, some of the most conservative legislators in the state, to much of the surprise of many, are coming on board actively in support of the Green Amendment, you know, because they serve communities where they do have farmers, where they do have fishers, you know, folks that are fishing for their livelihood, who recognize the importance of a clean and healthy environment. So it's really different, but it's also, as you know, it's about how you talk to people. If I go in and speak to, you know, a conservative person and in these broad strokes about clean water and clean air, rather than saying, look, you're a farmer, and the farmer down the road, Alan Schaap, he was just in the news because he just reported that he lost $11 million of revenue, his entire stock of cattle, because of PFAS contamination. Now their ears perk up. It's a little bit different. It's somebody else in the same industry who's been harmed in a meaningful way in terms of their life, in terms of their livelihood, in terms of economics. So it's all about making sure we talk with people where they're at, because we do all need a clean and healthy environment. And it's just about how you talk with what's your terminology, what's your approach. If you approach it as a partisan issue, it's going to come back at you as a partisan issue. But if you talk about it as an issue of all people, then we start to get support. And we've had some really powerful testimony in other states. So it's really quite inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Oh, let's see. Councilwoman King, please.
Thank you so much. I just put it in the chat, but I'll reiterate it. My question was, have you seen any kind of legislation like this at the county level, which might address our charter? I mean, I put some into our Maui County General Plan. I put, climate change as one of the key focus points, which wasn't in there before, but something like this amendment would probably be easier to get passed at a county level first. And we've had that same experience with the chemical sunscreen ban that was first proposed at the state level that got weakened down to pretty much nothing. There are 2 chemicals that banned. We were able to pass one at our county that bans all chemical sunscreens. And now the state is, again, I think Nicole Lowen is looking at that at the state level to try to strengthen their bill. So sometimes things can happen at the county level a little bit easier and quicker. I just wondered if you'd seen any examples of something like this being passed at a county level.
So it's certainly a question that I get asked, and that may be an approach that strategically our grassroots partners want to think about. But the reality is that that's not a green amendment, because you're not talking about a constitution that's going to have the same kind of effect that we're talking about here, right? We are talking about valuable local ordinance or protections, but we are really talking about, trying to get transformational change at the state level and then ultimately at the federal level. And one of the other things that just comes to my mind, right? And it's not to say that that's not a good strategy, right? It's all about getting the message out. So one of the things we do encourage as part of our Green Amendment strategies in different states is getting municipal resolutions for people to say, I support this. So, getting them to pass a municipal resolution and a county ordinance at the same time, like a county resolution and a county ordinance. Hey, that's you're feeding two birds with one seed, and you're communicating to the state legislature that you want this. On the other hand, if you put in place that kind of protection, let me put it to you, one of the reasons why those municipalities wanted to join us in our Pennsylvania action against Act 13 is because Act 13 preempted that local zoning authority that allowed local government to keep fracking out of residential communities and limit it to, just industrial zones. And so the local government said, hey, wait a second, you're stripping us of our constitutional right, authority, and obligation to protect the environmental rights of our constituents. And at the same time, you're actually mandating that we advance unconstitutional behavior in our municipality. And so they, in part, relied on the constitutional obligation to protect their local authority to zone when it came to fracking. Later, they've done it. There was a similar thing having to do with plastic ban limitations at the local level. The state tried to preempt and usurp that authority, and the county or the municipalities relied on the Green Amendment to protect their authority. So the point is if you did this at the county level, you may have a situation, right, where the state legislature tries to override and usurp your authority and you're kind of lost. But if it's done at the state level, it's going to apply at the county level as well, right? Because it's going to apply to all levels. Right. Of government. So it may be a good strategy to think about and a good organizing strategy, but it is accomplishing it is not getting a Green Amendment, right? It is.
Well, I understand that. Yeah, I was just wondering if there was anything, you've seen that was similar because, Maui County did declare a climate emergency first, and then the state declared a climate emergency. So we've been able to be kind of an example in some areas for the state. So I just thought if there was something that we could start looking at the county level to maybe push this along. The folks at 350.org I've been working with on some of the things that they've been pushing at the state level. And so trying to say, hey, we've done this at the county level. And the thing that happened with this, with the sunscreen bill was that we were in the midst of pushing a bill forward, and then the state preempted us. And so their bill became effective at the beginning of this year, and that preemption ended. And that's when I pushed our stronger bill and got it done. And now we're getting some mineral sunscreen dispensers on Maui, yay, from the state. So there's a lot of things that we can influence, I think, by pushing it at the county level. And I only have to convince 4 other colleagues on my council to pass it.
It's a great strategy, and a lot of the leaders thinking about the movement, and I'm sure we would be happy if you'd like to become one of them, are on this call right now. And so you just shared that great idea with everybody all at once.
Okay, and thank you, Maya, for asking about this slide. You're welcome to use it however you want.
I want to give you credit for it, so make sure when you email it to me, tell me how to credit you, because It is a beautiful thing. Thank you.
All right. Okay, aloha.
Could I ask in response to Kelly's question? Thank you, Kelly, especially for Maui County's work on the climate resolution and on the sunscreen bill. You really are leading over there, and we really appreciate it. I wanted to tell everybody that there's an opportunity to take action on sunscreens, and I'll be very brief because this is about green amendments today. But there's a hearing Monday at Senator Gabbard's Agriculture and Environment Committee. 1 p.m. If you testify 24 hours ahead and get your testimony in on time, that's this weekend. And that would be Senate Bill 2949, which would kind of follow the leadership of Maui County, and it would ban all chemical sunscreens that are not generally recognized as safe and effective by the Food and Drug Administration. Her bill goes even farther, I think. The bill currently does follow the existing oxybenzone law in having preemption. I'll recommend, and you might want to recommend too, that language be stripped out, at least from the bill. Industry will fight for it, and we'll see what happens. Senator Gabbard also has a second bill, Senate Bill 3001, which is being heard on Wednesday at 1 p.m. It's very similar. It needs amendment, though, because it would supplant the existing oxybenzone law, which we don't want to do. Even if you have all the chemical sunscreens banned because they're unsafe for human health, you still want to ban oxybenzone and octinoxate because they're bad for the reefs. And in Hawaii, that's very important too. So we want to have these laws supplement each other, not be supplantive. Chair Lowen in the House has a bill 1519, which is similar, but it has not yet been slated for hearing. So that's my thanks and quick report on sunscreen legislation if people want to get involved in that too. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Ted. Thank you, Maya. All right, we have a question in the chat. This is from Sherry Pollock. She wants to know how the Green Amendment would have helped and what's going on with Red Hill.
So thinking about Red Hill, right, there have been actually a number of points in time where perhaps having a Green Amendment could have been helpful, right? The Department of Health had to issue permitting for the tanks to be able to operate and to advance and to stay in use, right? And every single one of those decision-making points, had there been a Green Amendment, should have been a point to inform their decision-making, and people could have used it in their advocacy. But then also when it was very clear that it was really inappropriate to issue, renew the permitting, perpetuate the permitting, you know, what requirements were or were not in the permitting, when all of these things were issues, every single one of those, I think, would have created an opportunity to use the Green Amendment through advocacy and through the law to get a different outcome. And when Sierra Club was doing their litigation at the varying points, they could have strengthened their case by referring to the Green Constitutional Amendment if it had been in existence at the time. So, you know, never know exactly how all these things are going to play out, but because this applies to all government officials, when that permitting was happening, when that permitting wasn't being properly enforced, when the elements weren't strong enough, when it was being renewed, every single one of those would have and should have been an opportunity to use the Green Constitutional Amendment to get a better, safer outcome for everybody, and really, again, prevented the harm. And if the harm, to the extent that it wasn't prevented, and when they started noting that there are problems, right, that the contamination was happening, the amendment could have been used to secure stronger reaction sooner, more meaningful protections sooner out of the government. So I think it could have played out a lot of different ways if Hawaii had this protection in its constitution.
Thank you, Maya. I actually have a question based on what you're saying, because right now we are experiencing something that's pretty dire, in my opinion, and there's really nothing much that we can do. The Department of Health has issued a permit to the Navy, and it was in last night's news, that they can discharge the flushed water that they're going through the pipes into Halawa Stream. Now, the permit not only covers Halawa Stream, that seems to be the first area of flushing for the discharge, but it also covers Waiawa Stream, Kala'au Stream, Aiea Stream, Moanalua Stream, and ultimately down to the Pearl Harbor Estuary. Now, and given that we're too late, okay, we are too late to do anything really about it insofar as trying to, be up in hearing and object to the permit. It's already been issued. All we can do at this point would be to try to rescind it. How would the Green Amendment then help in that regard? Because this is something immediate.
Yeah. So, well, the first thing that we have to do is get it. Right? And we're going to have the coming weeks and months to make that happen. But that really is the first thing that we're going to have to do. And we're going to, and then after that, we're going to have to see where we're at with regards to that permit or that permitting. But and what scientific evidence people are going to be able to collect, what data and information are we going to be able to collect to demonstrate that that permitting is resulting in serious consequences that are rising to an unconstitutional level when it comes to the Green Constitutional Amendment, right? And then use that to try to go back at that permit and permitting. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, right? It's going to depend on, again, where the science stands. It's going to depend on what that permit actually says. And unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to look at it, although it sounds horrifying. It's going to depend on a lot of things. But if we can get the amendment, we potentially create a new and powerful opportunity to have a meaningful effect. If we don't have the amendment, then, you know, sort of the history is written, as you said, unless somebody can find a state law or maybe, you know, bring a tort action, you know, or an action in negligence or something, some other pathway. But this is giving the most powerful tool to try to hold the department to account for creating and perpetuating such serious harms when it seems pretty clear to everybody, and including the science and the scientists, that this is a bad idea. So.
Thank you, Maya. Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, I don't see any hands raised at this time. And nothing new has come in on the chat. I feel like this is such an opportunity to ask Maya more questions.
No, so I'm an active part of the coalition, of the Hawaii Coalition, and we talk and meet regularly. So, you know, if we want and need other opportunities for conversation, strategizing, just Q&A, you know, if there's going to, one of the things we've done here, you know, we've done in other states when a hearing's coming up, we just hold a Zoom so people can get on and ask questions, right? If they want to get the most recent efforts and then ask questions from myself and from others within the state, you know, like Ted, like you, like Sherry, like others, like Alan, who clearly has a wealth of knowledge to share. And so this isn't by any means the last, because I'm afraid that you're kind of stuck with me now. Now that we've got the movement going in Hawaii, I am pleased to do it via Zoom. And once COVID lets up, I'm going to be really pleased to, you know, when necessary, come there in person. I'm right now in person in New Mexico because it's really hot and heavy here right now, and people thought my being present would be beneficial. If that decision is made in Hawaii, then, you know, I'm happy to come, and I just want to help save the world. And to me, this is a powerful way to do it, and I'll do whatever to get us there.
Okay, perfect. We do have a hand up. Alan Burdick.
Thank you. I was not going to ask this question because I thought the Red Hill question was far more valuable. But since we do have a little time for nerd questions here, the language, and there's something I put in the chat very high up, but my partner, co-chair of Environmental Caucus, didn't catch it. I like the phrase in the existing environmental provision in the Constitution that uses the term every person, and also expressly speaks of a right of action, you know, a right of action. And that I know the first one is not there in the proposed Green Amendment. Rather, it says all people or something like that. And I'm afraid that language like that might be interpreted in a way that would undermine what we lawyers call the self-executing nature of the provision. In other words, something that, since it's there, you can use it, rather than having to wait for the legislature to basically gas up the car and say, okay, now you can use it. So I'm wondering why the proposed Green Amendment as it is right now does not speak of every person. I would be more comfortable with that language.
So we had a lot of discussion about that amongst the coalition and with the senator's office. At one point, the language was different. I think that there were some concerns about when you link that up with the you know, sort of corporate personhood that has been granted under the law, what might be better. So there have been a lot of different versions. I'm just going to suggest to you, Alan, I personally don't think it matters which of those terms you use. To me, it is clear in the interpretation and in terms of what we can refer to elsewhere that we really are talking about each and every person individually as well as a community. You know, and it's sort of 6 of one, half dozen of another. I hear you that your opinion is different, and that's certainly something worthy of consideration. I'm glad you brought it forth. In terms of self-executing, I do want to address that. So we had, said last year, and I recommend in all my Green Amendment proposals that in order to avoid an argument that it's not self-executing, that language be specifically included. Although we've done the research, Ted and I and others have done the research, and it would be interesting if you have different research to say that in Hawaii, if it's in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, it is going to be interpreted and applied as self-executing. But we always want to avert the argument to have the outcome like you had in Pennsylvania for a while, that the courts would treat this amendment different than other amendments in the Bill of Rights section. So we do recommend explicitly saying this is self-executing. We had that language in there last year. There was tremendous opposition in some of the committees, and that language actually got stripped out through the committee process. So there was some strategic discussion, and I think there was a decision by our legislative champions to try to avoid the opposition that drew from the Attorney General and from others by not including it and instead relying on the precedential case law. So agree with you, it's powerful and important. We think we get it anyway. And there was sort of that strategic decision because of the experience from last year.
Okay, just one technical point. If you can cite the, maybe in the chat, the earlier bill that drew the AG opposition, because I'd like to read that AG opposition.
Yeah. Do you happen to have that at your fingertips, Ted? Because otherwise, Alan, if you can send me an email,
I can put it in the chat.
I have it on my computer. Pardon?
Yeah,
I can put a link in there.
Yeah, Meg, please put it in the chat, but it's Senate Bill 502.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's last year's. It was in the original version of last year, right? And then there were a couple of iterations where there were modifications. That language came out. The climate language came out. We have our coalition has worked with the senator's office and with others to actually get the term climate put back in. We think that that's powerful and that's important. And it may not be in there in the way that has the greatest reading ease, but it is the way that we were able to get it in there and seek and secure the support of somebody who had previously been in opposition. So that was really a powerful accomplishment, and we're really happy to have that back in there. And Ted's laughing because we worked together very hard on that, but we are really proud that we got that back in, right, Ted?
Right, you got it.
All right, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hey, at this time, I'd like to thank all of our special guests, Maya Van Rossen, of course, Ted Bowlen, Tyler Levine, Lauren Blinkley, and Kelly King for sharing their time with us this morning and all their mana'o and where we can move forward on the Green Amendment. It just sounds wonderful. I really, really appreciate all your time, effort, and energy, Maya, especially in all that you do. So this time, if we could give her a clap, a hand, and raise, or however you want to do it.
For the whole coalition. It's a great coalition. We're all doing this together.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Okay, so before we close, I do want to make one announcement regarding this coalition. So the Hawaii Climate and Environmental Coalition will be meeting next on Wednesday, February 9th, and our featured speaker will be Danielle Bass. And she's with the state sustainability, she's a state sustainability coordinator with the state of Hawaii Office of Planning, and she will share her Hawaii 2050 sustainability plan. So that's Wednesday, February 9th at 6 o'clock. Please, everyone, tune in and put your emails in the chat if you want to join the coalition, if we don't already have you down, and notice will be sent out accordingly. So thank you, and everyone, please have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Although on Sunday, we'll be writing support testimony for what Ted was saying regarding the sunscreen bills and other environmental measures. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you for your time. Thank you, guests.